Good evening, everyone. Hello, I'm Councillor Audit. I'm the Chair of the Audit Committee. Please note that this meeting is recorded by the Council for live and subsequent broadcast where the Council's internet site. Officers will introduce themselves when speaking. Before I move to the next item, I would like to just go through the room and online for members to introduce themselves. So, I'm the Chair of this committee and my name is Councillor Audit.
Councillor Ashford, member from the Following Party Board.
Councillor Alexander, City Member for Alexander Park Board.
Does any of the councillors online want to introduce themselves? Councillor Mason? Councillor Mason is online. Okay, fair enough. So I'll move into the next item. Apologies for absence.
So, Chair, as a Chair, says we have no technical apologies, but I do understand Councillor Mason didn't want to.
Any urgent business?
No items received, Chair.
Declaration of interest? Petitions, petitions, presentation.
No items received, Chair.
So the minutes for the last Audit Committee meeting, which was on 21st of September 2003. The members have a look at the minutes, pages from 1 to 12. And I understand that there is an amendment is required.
Yes, Chair, on page 4, reference the word billion. If you want billion, you should say 1 million.
Has that been noted? Right? Can we agree the minutes?
Agreed.
Great, thank you so much. So, next item on the agenda is quarterly internal audit update from housing services and building safety. Can I now invite officers to introduce the report? I understand this Javid Rahman will be introducing the report.
Thanks, Chair. So my name is Javid Rahman. I'm the Operational Director for Housing Service. So members will be aware of the report that's been circulated in advance, but I think it's just worth highlighting some key points from the report. So 5 audits were completed for housing service and building safety for the period 22-23 and 23-24. The audit service areas consisted of customer experience or repairs, leasehold services, gas safety, stock condition, and support. A total of 34 recommendations were made in respect to those audits across those 5 areas. Of those, 7 were priority 1 recommendations, 22 were priority 2 recommendations, and 5 were priority 3 recommendations. Of the 7 priority 1 recommendations, 2 have been completed, 3 are substantially completed, and 2 are partially completed. And then on the 2 partially completed recommendations, 1 is for repairs and 1 is for gas safety. The repair recommendation relates to priority coding for repairs, which is currently subject to engagement by our customer core group. And the gas safety recommendation required more extensive data cleansing than originally anticipated, together with the procurement that we had to undertake. I think more generally, housing service sensitive resourcing of the hour coming back within the council. We've now got, and as you'd expect, when the insourcing took place, a significant turnover of senior managers. We've now got a relatively senior management team from myself, including the assistant directors, to the head of service, and boarding were committed to making sure all of the audit recommendations for this financial year and previous financial years are followed through. I've implemented a audit tracker for all audits across housing service, and that's monitored by myself and the management team quarterly going forward. One of the key points we've got the committee should be aware of, which is a key risk to the organisation, and members may already be aware of, is our decision to self-refer to the regulator for social housing at the beginning of the year. This followed the implementing of the AMRO, where we subsequently then did an external check with a third party. We confirmed and validated our own findings, and we need to self-refer. So we self-referred to the regulator in January this year. Our internal check and the external health check confirmed there were key areas of non-compliance, particularly in relation to fire risk assessments and electrical safety. So the regulator found us in breach of the home standard. So just so members are aware, the audit committee are aware, the council has entered into voluntary undertaking with the regulator for social housing, and our commitment as part of this voluntary undertaking is to deliver the improvement action plan that we've agreed with the regulator. So since earlier this year, myself and the regulator monthly online improvement plan where they track the progress of what we're committed to do. And more generally, the feedback from the regulator has been extremely positive in both the improvement that they're seeing and the rapid pace in the improvement that they're seeing. Just to give you an example, so when we self-referred in January, 8,000 of our homes didn't have a electrical safety certificate. Of the 8,000, 4,000 were over 10 years. So that's now reduced down to 68. And from the 8,000 that didn't have a valid electrical safety certificate under 5 years, that's now reduced down to 1,054. The report also highlights the need to make sure that we've got a compliance system in place, and the team are working to a spreadsheet which is manually driven, which attaches a significant amount of risk in the way they work. So we've now completed the procurement compliance system, and the plans which we've confirmed with the regulator are due to go live in April, and that's on schedule. I think one of the other points is worth highlighting is when we self-referred to the regulator confirmed, which we knew for some time, 30% of our stock was classed as non-decent. As part of our voluntary undertaking with the regulator, we confirmed by the end of this year would bring a minimum of 1,000 homes to decency level. So as of October, we brought in around 800 homes to decency level. As of now, we've actually not just met the target we've agreed with the regulator, we've exceeded it. So we're hoping by the end of this financial year, we'll be in around 1,400 to 1,500 territory of making homes decent. So just in summary, the voluntary undertaking we've agreed with the regulator, that's due to be completed by March 2024. We're currently on track to achieve all of the undertaking we made with the regulator. And more importantly, the regulator has stated their confidence in the council's improvement plan and the direction of travel so far and today. Happy to take questions from members.
Thank you, Jared, for the report. So, Councillor Govat, and then Councillor Brennan, Councillor Rossetti, and then Councillor Mason. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I've just got a few questions, but I'll be brief if that's okay. Thank you, Jade, for the brief introduction to this report. Just a few questions with regards to the progression of the some of the recommendations. In terms of the repeat repairs, you mentioned April. Is that basically for all the recommendations? Is that the time frame that is being set to meet those targets, to meet those recommendations? And then in the meantime, what is being done to reduce repeat repairs and what measures are being taken in the meantime to reduce repeat repairs. In terms of the repair jobs that are marked incorrectly as complete, what monitoring will be put in place to ensure this doesn't happen in future? In terms of the stock conditions, I can see that the recommendation around improved controls of the stock conditions database is outstanding and not resolved until a new asset management database is in place. What's the update on the progress of this? Paragraph 5.5 at page 18. What timeframe are we looking at to complete the outstanding actions relating to the electrical installation condition report and fire risk actions? Is that also April? Because I think I saw on page 110 of the papers, it was mentioned March 2024. So I just wanted to get clarity on that. And in terms of strengthening compliance recommended by the external health checks, I understand a new compliance management system is going to be put in place, which you mentioned earlier. In the meantime, what monitoring has been put in place to ensure we are on track and actions are being met adequately? Because I know you mentioned the spreadsheet which has risks. Is there anything else being put in place in the meantime before we have those systems in place to ensure we don't have any issues?
You want to take those questions, Janet?
Yeah, so quite a few questions there, so I'll just try and take it one by one. So with regards to repeat callers, one of the things that we've done is part of the, if you look at the repairs journey, is at the point of receiving a call, the contact centre understanding, what is the actual nature of the repair. So by the time it goes to the resident, we're not sending them on opportunities to go carry out the repair. So we've invested in what we've now got is co-location of the contact centre staff that's outside of housing service, the days that they come and sit with one repairs team, just to make sure the actual diagnostic, when it's recorded, is recorded accurately, so the right operative and the trained person goes and attends. With regards to the type of quality controls that we're putting in place to improve the quality of the actual work, so just this week, and this has been a series of discussion, we recognise that there needs to be an element of post-inspections that need to be done, but more importantly, where you've got operatives that report to team leaders, the team leaders are routinely going into some of the jobs that they do, ensure that some of the basic housekeeping, like taking a picture of the repair before they start the repair and taking a picture of the repair after they've completed is done. So there isn't that consistency across all operatives. So we've issued a letter to all operatives confirming what standards going forward, and failure to comply with the new way of working will result in disciplinary action being taken, just to make sure that all operatives are working in a very consistent way and they're quite clear around what's expected. If there are any training issues, we've also said we want how to train those operatives. On the stock condition survey with Penningtons, so we've outsourced the Penningtons work. So we've got an external company doing all of our stock condition surveys, and the idea is that we get a good understanding of what the condition of our stock is. And you're not able to do that unless you go into every single one of our properties. At the moment, we've got access to about 70% of our stock, and we're finding the remaining 30%. So generally, what most organisations would do is take that 30% and then try and clone the data for the remaining 30% to get an understanding across the borough. What we are doing, however, is we're going back to those 30%, offering weekend and evening appointments so we can get access. We think by the time the programme is completed by February, it might be around 75–76% mark, but very rarely landlords ever get 100% access for stock conditions. And that will then form the basis of our plan investment. With regards to compliance and spreadsheet, we recognise the way the team are currently working is a risk, and it will continue to be a risk until we move them to a system. So there are additional checks being done by supervisors just to ensure the entries are correct. But the reality is, up until we move them away from the spreadsheet, that risk will be there. We're aware of it as the regulator, which is why there's a big focus on getting the system in place. So when we self-refer to the regulator, we haven't had the discussion with procurement, what's done for us to get the system in. So in the last 5 months, we've taken the need to make sure we've got a system through procurement. We've gone to the market, we've ordered a contract, we've ordered that contract. Between now and April, we're looking at the mobilisation of the system. So by April, we can go live with the compliance system. One of the things that we are prioritising, so there's 6 areas of compliance. We're going to be prioritising to go live initially with both fire and electrical in April, and with the remaining 4 areas, we'll do a phased rollout. And I think on the final point, Councillor, the electrical programme, we are due to finish that programme by this year. So by end of December, all of our homes will have a valid electrical safety certificate, with the exception where we've not been able to get access to a few. So at the moment, we've got about 700 properties where we've not been able to get access. We envisage those 700 will have to go through legals, and then we go to court to get a injunction or warrant to be able to do a forced entry to carry out the electrical safety certificate. But in total, we've got about just over 13,000 homes now with a valid electrical safety certificate, which is a significant improvement to where we were at the beginning of the year.
Does that answer your so, Mr. Brennan?
Very small query. I noticed that a lot of your improvements are sort of reliant on sort of improved compliance and asset management and safety, a long-term data plan, the sort of data planning, which I quite understand, because you do want to move away from the spreadsheet. I just wondered how sure you are that you will be supported, that it's possible for the council to support you to prioritise this, because I do think that the housing issues should be the biggest priority really in the council. So are you going to be able to meet your targets via, through them? Are they behind you in being really, it's perfect?
Well, thank you, Councillor, for the question, and I think I'm quite fortunate, probably in a unique position where the Chief Executive, the Council have made it quite clear improving housing is their #1 priority. And it's not just words, so the Chief Executive personally chairs the Housing Improvement Board once every 6 weeks, where we do a deep dive with cross-party members, looking at the issues we've got across housing services, understanding the challenge. Director, I've got 600 staff, 30 different areas, and we presented the Housing Improvement Plan to Cabinet earlier this year, where Cabinet agreed an additional £5 million investment in our housing service. We recognise repairs is not where it needs to be, so from that £5 million, £2.7 million is going in our repair service, and the Chief Executive chairs the Housing Improvement Board with cross-party members, because we recognise some of it may be quick wins, some of it will take slightly longer to improve. What are the challenge? What is the recovery plan? Do we have the right, like you said, resource and support behind it? And what are the current indicators say in terms of how that plan is progressing and working? So in terms of answering your question, from my perspective, yes, it does feel like it is a priority. It is being supported corporately as well as from our cabinet.
A couple of questions. One is on those tables on page 14. So there is a series of recommendations, and the way I read the tables is that they've been raised in July 2023, or is that this is the situation at July 2023? In any case, for instance, if we take customer experience, there are 3 complete out of 10 list of the services 1 complete out of 6, stock condition 1 out of 5, and so on. So I would like to understand when these are likely to be completed in terms of recommendation, because I couldn't find a sort of correspondence here. And again, is this March 2024, or we are looking at different time scale? And then I'm aware that you will ask about the monitoring, internal monitoring. My question is, how are members monitoring the progress here? Because I'm aware that there is this cross-party group, but none of the documentation minutes and data are public. So I wonder if it's possible to either receive an update in the next month so we can see the progress, or if there is, I don't know, this sort of data is submitted to another member committee or scrutiny panel or sort of, do. And then last question about this document, that is put here as a background papers, having a council voluntary undertaking, statutory health and safety. I wonder if it would be possible to be shared with the members.
Yes, so I think in terms of the answer to the last question, the voluntary undertaking is a public document, even to come in for approval. So I can ask one of my staff members to share the link with you. We're more than happy to do that. I think with regards to the progress of some of the recommendations, certainly for these number one, we accept progress has been slow. Having said that, we have had a change of personnel across housing services insourcing. So where we've had a gap in senior leadership, and then we've subsequently recruited permanently to those posts, those new members of staff are progressing those recommendations. Ultimately, it's for services to own those recommendations, implement it, and my role is to stress test to what extent it's been implemented. So one of the things, as I mentioned at the beginning of my sort of overview, is all of the audit recommendations going forward comes along to my management team. I look at when the recommendation was made, what the deadline was, and how far they progressed to completing it. So where it's not started or partially complete, there may be legitimate reasons that I may need to know, but that level of accountability is had at my management team. With regards to wider scrutiny, I suppose this is probably the forum where I come along and provide you an update on how we're progressing in terms of all of the recommendations that we have in housing services, which is what I've said.
And so can I ask for the time scale for completion of those recommendations on page 14, please? If you have a time scale.
I think the time scale will vary from one area to another. So it'd be quite difficult to give you a one time scale for all of the recommendations across 12 of the reports.
It can be done offline in the next day.
Sure.
Councillor Mason.
Thank you. Good evening, nice to see you again. I realise there's a huge amount of work that's being done and you're doing so, but just to pick up on some of the detail of it, because I was looking at hard to do with financial and reputational risk, and the reputational risk we see quite a lot at ward level. So the issue that so I can just run through about 3 or 4 different quick points. So the first one is that when we talk about customer experience, one of the issues is how many people make level 2 complaints, and also whether the people who have made complaints to the ombudsman and they've been heard and reported back. So I think information about that would be really useful because it gives us another impression of what's happening. So if we could have some data on that, I would be really happy. Secondly, just to follow on about Councillor Rossetti, when we talk about complete by data, I do understand that that's hard, but I think it would be fair for us to know when we think that there is going to be some kind of turnaround, that we were able to say to our residents, this was a really big thing that we're doing, we're getting there. We should be getting there in 5 years, 2 years, just some rough way in which we can talk to people would be really helpful. The next one, in terms of customer experiences and repeat repairs, is one which is very reputationally difficult. You know, that people who come along and they've had 3 people coming along and they've had 2 dates giving them the date that the repair is going to be done. They've had a day off work each time and nothing's happened. And I do send emails, not all the time, but reasonably regularly about that. So I'm hoping that the new electronic system will help to track that. But are you aware of other reasons why that happens? And are you confident that with just a new electronic system, that will, it might happen sometimes, but it shouldn't be happening as much as it is. I'm sure you are aware and agree with that. The next issue I had was around leaseholder, and that is especially a new process for Section 20 costs. I suppose I just want to flag that that's something that practically every leaseholder I ever meet is concerned about and complains about, and I just wanted to, I suppose, flag that whatever systems you're using, I think we'd be really relieved to know that you've moved on to some kind of other system, and so it'd be good to keep us up to speed on that. Thank you. And I've got one more thing which will happen, which is about the electric checks. So, do we know how many of the 1,004 electric checks that haven't been completed? I know you said a certain number of them, you have 700 or so, you haven't had compliance, but do you know how many of those high-rise blocks? And if there are any in high-rise blocks, because they pose a very high significant risk in my amateur opinion, and so I'd really like to know if there are any, and if so, whether they are going to whether there's going to be some quick return on those. And I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. So if I pick up the question of the housing ombudsman, so at the time when we self-referred to the regulator for social housing, a week before I joined the organisation, the housing ombudsman announced a wider paragraph 49 investigation into Harrogate services, and you may be aware of the report that they subsequently published. Within the report, they recommended, they made about 25 recommendations spanning 9 different areas. So part of my priority was certainly to meet with my team to go through those recommendations and then implement them as quickly as possible. So in addition to my monthly meeting with the regulator for social housing, I also meet with the housing ombudsman. So from the 25 recommendations that they've made, we've implemented 20 recommendations and 5 are outstanding. And again, the feedback from the housing ombudsman has been really positive in the way we've engaged with their investigation. We took a very non-defensive position. We welcomed their insight, and we've been working with them and using their feedback to implement some of those recommendations. And whilst implementing those recommendations, each month we've submitted our evidence behind how we've implemented it. So again, in October, I did a wider seminar jointly with the housing ombudsman for this sector, because I think some of their findings isn't necessarily just specific to Harrogate, but across the sector, certainly the repair side. So what we've seen in repairs and across the country is the same issue. We had a period where, just because of COVID, we had lockdown, so landlords weren't able to get access to the property to do the repair. When lockdown was lifted, all of a sudden an influx of repairs that needed to be done. And in addition to that, last year we had the tragic case of our Ishak, where Michael Gove spoke to all chief executives wanting assurance around our mould. So the repairs go, side of the business across all landlords has had significant pressure to deal with the backlog of repairs they've got by an increase of new demand coming in. So the ombudsman recognise that there are something which is nationally applicable, not specific to Harrogate. So we shared with the sector what we did with their feedback, how we're improving some of our policy and the way we work, and then just doing a more wider session. Someone did actually ask the housing ombudsman what confidence do they have that Harrogate are improving, and the ombudsman were quite open and honest and said they have absolute confidence in the work they've seen today. I think your point around the audit, around providing some deadlines. So, you know, like I said, across those 5 areas, there are key deadlines that are already attached to the recommendation. I'll go away and come back and confirm how quickly we can close down each of those areas for repairs, leasehold, stock condition, gas safety, stocks, and on the repairs, I fully accept your point at the moment. I think we're good for single trade jobs. So when a repair needs to be done in a single trade, we often can go in, do it, and close it quite quickly. But the moment it becomes a multi-trade job, that's when the complications arise in organising the follow-up work. And part of our internal work is to try and make sure how we can do that a lot more smoothly than we're currently doing at the moment.
Chair, can I just chip in and just ask another question about that rather than you? Is that okay?
Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask whether you have a system in place to pick up those troublesome repairs, if you like, you know, where we all, I'm sure, a list of people who have been trying to get something repaired for 2 years, 3 years, and who time and again something happens.
Yeah.
Do you separate those out so that there's a way of keeping track of them?
So part of the plan going forward is to have a complex repair team. So you've got the ordinary repair, which you can send someone out, get it closed out fairly quickly, and then you've got very complex repairs that need significant work with a number of internal teams. So part of the proposal going forward is to have a complex repair team that deal with those types of jobs, so we can manage it a lot better than the way we're currently managing it at the moment.
Thank you.
I think when you point around leaseholders, if we can get some data around from the no accesses we've had from the 750, I believe it is now, how we relate to high-rise buildings. I'm sure we can provide you information.
Thank you, so Councillor next.
Sorry, but I just wanted to ask this couple of things, and most of it's can I just ask about a couple of things? One, I think I did listen to some of your meeting with the for me, except I had cases which you said, for example, that we would not leave residents with this in a state of disrepair. And actually, we have left residents in a state of disrepair, which is what we used to in the past when there was a fallout between the housing staff and the tenant. And actually, my experience is that's not true. And I picked up a couple, and maybe class of lucky to sell a house and had a really good officer, Peter, was just fabulous. It's just so easy to work with things. But I was a bit disappointed to hear you categorically say that, and actually, my experience, that's not true. So I'm a little bit mindful that what I get is a very positive impression from you, and it's nice to hear it. But I don't always get it on the ground. Northern Parts, an area of substantial social housing, and with some of the worst housing stock in the borough. And it was the area earmarked for HDB, which was, the reason it was earmarked for it, but it's such a hard area, it really is. So I would quite like to get a report now, and I understand from customers' point of view, or the tenants' point of view, our tenants, they are our tenants. I'd like to get a bit more of that kind of view now, in a way, in their experience, because I get this positive image, that's not my experience, seriously. Same with repairs. I know that I dealt with a couple where I rang in for a gentleman who had 2 big repairs, and they didn't move on it at all. They let him down, and he didn't have time off, and he worked for the council. I did say to them, discipline by the council, I'll pop in myself, but I had to ring in to make the arrangements for him, and then they were quite happy to make it. He said he'd gone to customer services in Wood Green to complain about it, and nothing was there. So I think there is a disconnect between customers and how we're getting our responses. I'm a little bit anxious about that because I don't want to. I think it should always be them first. They pay their rent and they pay their service charge, and they deserve the best housing we could possibly ever provide. So I'm always very disappointed when it happens. So that's one of the things. And what I don't want from a customer point of view or tenant point of view, from a tenant point of view, because we have what we used to have when homes were Haringey feedback, which is, do you know what, they used to pick out all the people who did all the right things, or said all the right things, and actually we never got very far with it. So I'd quite like us to think about how we can engage with residents and think about how we get some decent feedback, please, because what I don't want is to have you thinking it's all wonderful, it's getting there, and really on the ground it isn't. So I'd quite like to do that. I don't know how to have a solution for them. And I'd quite like to be involved in some of that too, because otherwise there's a disconnect between what you're thinking and what you're doing and what you're reporting on the rest of us. You know, we're the councils, we get involved in the work, so you know, I want to kind of the other area which I know is not, I know it's not. I'm so sorry. Long-winded, I'm very sorry. The other area that I haven't, it's not in here today, but it's sheltered housing, which I now raised with Denise because I had a resident who 66 and lived in Bruce Castle Ward actually, and really should be in sheltered housing. And I'm finding more and more that there are people in sheltered housing who shouldn't be in sheltered housing, and they've arrived for all kinds of reasons. And there's a problem, there's a lot of antisocial behaviour in sheltered housing. From the Castle Peacock, for example, to the Lowry House. And there were people who come in at night and who were up there. And although she raised it, nobody would believe her. Now they're starting to put cameras. But you know, there is a lot going on in sheltered housing, which I am absolutely worried about. And secondly, can I say that when Homes for Haringey, in the final year or so, there was a report that was so critical of the sheltered housing schemes in the borough that we never even got sight of it. And the reason I know is because a couple of members, council members, were on the board of Homes and Haringey, so I know how bad it was. And my fear is that it has not improved, and we are again being disregarded now. And I quite like both of those reports at the forefront of some of the areas that we are.
Just one second, Councillor, if you can just turn off your mic, please. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Councillor, for the questions. And I think, like you said, you were listening to the Housing Ombudsman seminar that I did. And I hope what you took away from the seminar was a very open and honest conversation about where we are and what we need to do. So the idea of projecting a really positive image about where we are in housing is not, accurate. What I would say is the direction of travel in what we've seen and what I've just said in reducing the number of homes without a valid electrical safety certificate is a matter of fact, not my opinion. The numbers have gone down. The number of homes that we're bringing from non-decency level to decency level, again, is a matter of fact, not my opinion. The work we've done around the compliance system, again, at the beginning of the year, we didn't have any plans to procure a compliance system. Where we are now, we have a rewarded contract, and we're working towards mobilising a go-live date. Again, it's a matter of fact. So I fully recognise the challenge we've got in housing services. What I am quite keen to say is we've done an enormous amount of work, which has been recognised both by the regulator and the Housing Ombudsman, and that's just me reiterating that to committee members. With regards to that particular case that you mentioned, I do think context is really important. So I spoke about a particular case where the council took a position where we refused to do works in that property. Now, if we look into the context of why, we sent a operative to go and do repair work. The resident threatened our operative with a hammer. The council then looked into the resident's file, and they had a history of ASB. So at the time, the council's position is, safeguarding the well-being of our staff, so we don't put them in harm's way. And when the Housing Ombudsman raised this with me, that we refused to work to a particular property because the resident threatened our operative with a hammer, what my view was, and was there a solution? My view was, yes, there is a solution, where we can go in and do the works, providing the resident wasn't home. So that is what we agreed at the end, where we sent our operative to go and carry out the work, as long as the resident wasn't home, who may pose as a potential risk to our staff who work for Harrogate Council.
Can I just pick up on that? It wasn't.
Sorry.
Can I just say, yeah, just say that wasn't the issue for me. It's just that you said you didn't do that, and yet I had a resident, Mrs. House, who was left after with a complete lack of disrepair after the water leaks that house, and he was there from. He was returned in about February, and he was there till September 19 and contacted Peter. I've got his name, it's just, now I went to the trouble of trying to find the right person to get that sorted. Now he was with holes in his ceiling, in his bathroom, the whole thing was a real mess. So my point was not that that was the case. I mean, I thought it was just, all I'm doing is to give you an example of where it didn't quite match what you say. That's all. There are still residents, I'm afraid to say, who are still left in a really poor state of housing, and despite every attempt to try to get it sorted, they're not succeeding. So I think, and often because they've fallen out with the housing officers, for whatever reasons, so life happens.
You were just coming.
Yeah, Councillor, I think what we have said is we recognise that this amount of stock is not decent. It will take up to 5 years to bring all of our stock within decency levels. Often when we look at repairs, we're looking at the symptom, not the cause, which is we've not invested in our stock at the right levels. And part of the plan going forward, we're investing a significant amount of money in our plan investment programme over the next 5 years. And we recognise that in order to bring our stock within decency level, it will take 5 years. But the figures for this year, does confirm we're bringing at least 1,500 more properties within decency levels. But I fully accept your point, Councillor. There are issues of our repair service that we need to get right, some of the basics. But just looking at Kenny Proper's house, just to mention and just to give you some confidence, we are planning on doing planning works to Kenny Proper's house next year. And we provided a more specific members briefing last week, which I hope gives you a bit more insight into some of the plans going forward.
Can I just remind you?
Councillor, sorry, just 1 second. If there's any further questions, please email, because we have to move on.
Can I just raise, please, Chair?
Is it going to be raised really quick?
I don't want him to respond to it now, but I would like him to respond to me later, because otherwise it's a key area that I raised, which is around sheltered housing. And at the moment, sheltered housing is not being looked at in any major way. And I personally feel really, really disturbed by that and really quite upset about the way it's been treated at the moment. So can we have something back to sheltered housing and the way it's managed?
Can we get that confirmed? That you're going to be providing with a response in relation to sheltered housing?
We can certainly add that onto the forward plan of audits for the next financial year. I'll have to discuss that with internal colleagues for that to be added on.
Thank you. Is another question from Councillor Brennan? Could you please be brief, because there is a significant amount of time on this. Thank you.
This is very brief. In your page 16, 4.8, you mentioned the new escalation matrix. You mentioned a new escalation matrix, which is, I think, concerning repairs. I just wondered if you could explain what that is.
So there are some particular jobs where you've got the contact centre having direct escalation to our repairs team, so the calls get directly referred over to them. So at the moment, the point of access is through the contact centre for residents, who then pass the note over to the repairs team for the work to be scheduled in. So there's improved escalation between both the contact centre and the repairs team working at the moment. And that's part of also looking at the way the initial diagnostic is done, so we felt that co-location between the two teams are really important.
So could we just note the recommendation for this report? Thanks so much, Jack. So there are some action points that we need to follow up. So I'll move on to the next item, which is item 8, update on the recommendation from the audit of the letting function in February 2023. Can I now invite Officer to introduce the report? Lead Officer Dennis Gandhi. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Denise Gandy. I'm the Assistant Director of Housing Demand. I'm here this evening to provide an update on the lettings audit. The audit reported in July 2023. We recognise the importance of the lettings process, given that we are letting to a very limited supply of social housing to a lot of people in housing need, which was why the audit was added to the plan. The original intention was that this would be a review of the kind of end-to-end voids process, including lettings, so from the point when a property becomes empty through to the sign-up. That wasn't possible at the time for reasons linked to the things that Jarhead was covering around the sort of range of priorities that were going on in the housing service. But I understand from Minesh that the intention is that we will revisit this quickly, which will also give us an opportunity to revisit some of the sort of lettings recommendations and to be able to provide reassurance that they have been completed. So the audit was carried out. There were 6 recommendations. 4 were priority 2 and 2 were priority 3. In terms of the kind of theme, I suppose there was quite a theme around recording. So as people will probably know from other settings, a new IT system was introduced around about 2 years ago now. That was done at a time when most people were working remotely, and so we have had some issues in getting sort of consistency of recordings. So staff do have access to 3 systems for slightly different reasons. So a lot of our improvements around recording, a consistency of recording, and the need to have one true record. So that came through in a number of recommendations. In terms of progress, 3 have been completed, 2 are partially completed, and 1, which was more around IT progress, has limited progress at this stage, but we now have it on the plan as a priority service and will be completed by the end of February. Best contact questions.
Okay, Councillor Audit.
Thank you, Chair. Just kind of a general observation. I noticed some of the recommendations between at pages 32 to 36. The management response is provided and timescales are also provided. Some have been completed, as you said. But just generally speaking, will there be regular reviews to ensure they are being followed through? So even the ones that have been completed, to ensure there's consistency and there is compliance with the recommendations. For example, peer reviews or independent reviews, just to ensure that, you know, in a couple of years' time, there is still compliance with those recommendations. Thank you.
So internally, we've introduced additional checks to make sure that we are compliant. This plan is monitored in terms of delivery, and as kind of Jarhead touched on, because the lettings process is very linked to the housing improvement, we will be taking it also through the sort of housing improvement board approach. So we will be reporting on lettings, including this audit, at the meeting in February, and then picking it up from there. We're not planning a peer review, but that's something which we could consider in the letting setting, but there isn't a plan.
So Bennett.
I was a bit disappointed to see that the audit on the voids wasn't possible. Have you got a date when you think this will be completed? Will you have the information?
Thank you, yes. I think your point is valid. It would have been good to have that complete end-to-end audit, but there were some factors which meant that we couldn't complete that one. So I've added into the plan for this year, and it's already started. So there will be a separate audit of the voids process from the time a property becomes empty to the time that is lettable and passed over to the lease team. So exactly the process is on that.
So if it were to come to this committee, what date do you think it might happen?
Final.
Can I look at my spreadsheet and send an update to the committee members?
More questions? Councillor Mason, please.
Thank you. This worked anyway. So thanks a lot, Denise, for this. And I mean, I think we know that there are some fundamental problems that you are facing, most of all to do with the huge number of people who are waiting for housing, the huge number of people who are in properties which are far too small for them, and we've heard about the repairs. So lots and lots and lots of issues that we pick up at the coalface as for councillors. Some of the things in the audit leave me with quite a few concerns, and I just want to know that you've got those KPIs set up to meet them. So the key issues on page 29, and for a sample of 5 general needs properties, there was some issues there, but from a sample of 5 shelter, 5 general needs lets made in 12 months, we didn't receive sufficient evidence to confirm that the rationale for bypassing applicants and resulting allocations was recorded on Northgate. It's one of the issues that we constantly pick up. People who believe that they are able to make an application, who have been told that they're number 1 on the allocation for that property, and the property disappears, and they're left with, coming to us to then try and fight the fire with them. So it's those kinds of things that I think are particularly troubling. But I think that the KPIs, when I looked at those in relation to the issues, they did seem reasonable. So having those KPIs in place and knowing that they were being followed, it seems to me to be a good temperature check. But I just wanted to know that sticks as a recommendation, and I'd really like to know when those KPIs will be put in place, if they're not in place already, how often they're reported on and who they're reported to, so that there's transparency in that.
So just to finish on the Councillor Brendan's question, just to say that from this letting, although it concentrated on lettings, there are definitely some recommendations here that we can learn across the piece, because it ended up being about those handoffs. So this report is going to place Naked and Housing Board in the first week in January, so that we can make a link across all these recommendations with giant services, and then we can pick it up in the audit that Minesh mentioned. In terms of the issue around bypassing, what we found during the course of the audit, so we have a policy about people that will be bypassed. So, for example, certain levels of rent arrears, if there's a medical recommendation that the property that the person has bid for doesn't match those requirements, things like that. So there is a guide to bypassing. What we found in the audit is that when the auditor was with the members of staff and they could say it's there on the system, the reasons had been complied with. What they were saying in the audit was, though, that it wasn't always recorded on Northgate. So the team have Northgate, which it should be the key system. They also have home connections, which is the way people bid and the sort of process, and they also put the evidence on SharePoint. And what the auditor found was there was inconsistencies. There would be a note somewhere, but somewhere at times it was on home connections, sometimes it was on Northgate, and we need Northgate to be our one version of the truth. So it's about that consistency rather than a concern that the wrong people were bypassed, etc. So it is a really important recommendation. That transparency is really important. And so thinking about how we share that information and being really clear with people up front about the situations where that will happen. I don't think we need to think much more about our communication on that and the way we manage expectation, because as you say, we've got nearly 13,000 on the register and we'll do about 300 lets a year. So actually managing that expectation, people not feeling, they've been bypassed unfairly or whatever it may be, is really important. In terms of these KPIs, some need to apply across the piece. So it is a whole process, which is why the voids end-to-end is important. So my lettings team start to do things when they get certain notifications. So we're monitoring it for lettings at the moment, and I have a monthly performance clinic that looks at the lettings data. So it comes to me. I think what we'd like to move to, because we report all sorts of performance to placemaking and housing board around voids, etc. But because of some of the things in the report about us not having it broken down task by task in the system, it doesn't, in the reporting we give currently, go into the sort of granular, you know, lettings received at that date, took them 2 days to advertise, it took them, you know, 3 days to rep, whichever. But that is where we want to get to, and then it would be through placemaking and housing. And that's part of the discussion we want to have on in January around the reporting that we do more broadly.
Thank you. I suppose my concern is that there is a system in place which allows problems to be picked up, and I understand what you're saying in terms of across the piece, etc. But knowing the average number of days to re-let empty homes, clearly there's some granular work in the background, but we just need to know, is that system in place and are we meeting that standard? Just to quickly go back to the reports that you're doing and the issues that you're raising. One of the, I accept the thing about how people are allocated, but the thing that we see, I'm sure my colleagues will see the same, are people who somehow have wrongly, incorrectly dipped out of the system, and how difficult it is to get them back in. So I had a case very recently, I don't want to bore you with all the details, but this woman ended up trying to take her own life because her housing was so awful. We ended up, through the mental health social worker in the institution she was sent to, being able to follow through. But I've been working on that case ever since I was elected, probably 18 months ago. So it's, you know, the fact that she ended up trying to take her life was really distressing. So there's those kinds of things where there are particular cases that come to us that I can never understand why they're not being picked up. And then we can fire them off and do urgent members' inquiries and goodness knows what. Is there a way in which those cases, which I know we're filtering all the time, but those cases where there clearly is a major issue and problem, is there a way in which those could be dealt with as special cases? Or are they being dealt with as special cases?
Ordinarily, they will end up being dealt with as special cases by the nature. Often they're then dealt with by the team manager rather than anybody else in checking that the process has been followed. So we receive individual cases in that way, and by the nature of them, they will receive attention.
Does that mean?
Follow up on what Councillor Mason was saying. I was a little bit worried that the decisions that were made, you say they're not recorded properly in the, you know, the system doesn't allow that record. I'm worried a little bit about the personal decisions which might be going into the system. I'm particularly worried because I know that people have been doing this, working on lettings, have been working in lettings for many years. So when I get complaints, they often know that person's name to make matters worse. So I worry a little bit that there isn't a level of independence in there, and I worry also, I mean, in terms of special cases, I just wonder who looks it over, who looks at the decision maker, and I worry about the decision makers actually, because you know, my residents count for me. That's all I want really. So I want to make sure that they're fairly being treated, and I don't always get that feeling. So I worry a little bit that there isn't somebody else who's checking the decision making, and is there a system that we can have in place where we can check that the decisions they have made were right? And can we put someone in place? Can, as councillors, can we be involved in looking at the decisions that were made for, I don't know, a period, a month, and look at how, you know, who got the accommodation and why? You know, so I quite like to look at the decision makers' decisions. So that's what. And can I just say also, because they've been, but they have been in place for a very long time, including in hands of Harry. So I have that kind of history sits with me, and then the decision making sits with me. So it worries me, there's a lot of connections, and there's
I mean, if we can have a discussion about putting an additional check in place, there are checks and balances within the system. The team themselves, some of them have been there a long time, some are comparatively recent, but yeah, we have had some people, but I have to say, they are in the committee. You know, I don't really get the impression that they work really hard and they're equally committed to our residents. I have to say that. If we think there's an additional check that's needed, there are certain stages of the process where people have the right to statutory review. So in terms of banding, in terms of the suitability of offers, etc. But if the view is that something else should be looked at, then that's something the council would need to explore.
I'd like us to think about that, please, because it seems to me if you have residents, all of whom can't understand, well, this person got it, that person didn't get it, and me as a member, I don't get it, and our decisions are made with it. I think a little bit of independence might be a good idea, even if it's for a short period of time, just to look at exactly what happens in the system.
Is that noted?
Could you just jump back into very, very quickly?
It has to be really brief.
It's acceptable. Thank you. Thank you.
Is in relation to this?
It's in relation to this, and it's really brief. So it's that I think what we've got is two different issues going on. One is about where we get cases which somehow become intractable and we can't move them, and where we might be able to have somebody to go to, some response on those. And I imagine that there's a handful. We're probably talking about 0.5% or something, or 0.5%. So it's small, but they are the ones that seem to take a long time, and we keep on coming back to it for. And I think what the other question that's being raised is a different one about transparency of lettings. So yeah, so I suppose I just wanted to be clear that what I was raising is really about complex cases and whether they could sit somewhere that would give us a bit more ease in trying to resolve them. Thank you. Yes. We'll give thought. Thank you, Leanne.
Just a general comment on what has just been said. Probably because in Alexandra there isn't a lot of housing stock, and I've been in a position to have to make inquiries about why somebody didn't get a letting or not. But if it's a decision, probably there is transparency around it. I would imagine that the councillor should be able to query why and how a decision has been taken and what's the rationale behind it. But other than that, what I wanted to raise is really a generic concern about, again, who is looking over all this monitoring and reporting. Because Denise mentioned, again, a lot of reporting. We mentioned the KPIs, and she mentioned, I think, the housing board. From memory, that housing board is made by officers and there is no member. So if that's the case, again, how can members be informed? Because we have all those working groups and internal committees, and the information is not shared. With Home for Harringay, whatever the problems were, minutes, every documents were on the website. We could go there and have a look. The same is for every single committee of the council. So I'm a bit concerned about this, and I wonder if somebody is looking into this and thinking how to sort of make all this monitoring and reporting that is being done visible to us councillors as well. Because I was being reminded, we receive Facebook from residents and we want to be able to even provide them data and say this is being done, this is the time scale, this is what is happening, and so that we can also give them the impression that something is being done. Thanks.
Yeah, so just a couple of things on that. So the placemaking and housing board is a officer board. The housing improvement board is a couple of senior managers, Joe had me and Dave Joyce and a couple of other people, plus some members, so Councillor Williams, I can't quite remember the range, but there are a number of people, members on that board, and we do get robust challenge around a range of issues, but very interested and open to thinking about transparency and how we can report performance more openly, because certainly in terms of lettings, so for example, we published the annual lettings plan, which shows certainly in terms of banding, you know, the types of cases that receive the influence, etc. So likewise on home connections, there is some information about, who the successful, not naming ones, who the successful bidder was, but bringing on that was the openness and doing that.
Thank you, Denny. So I just got an observation to make in relation to the Northgate application, because when I read the report on the weekend, it's been mentioned several times throughout the report. And going back to the points that members also raised about monitoring, tracking and capturing, because my understanding is that it hasn't been captured properly, and you mentioned about, so you have a system, but the system is not being in operation effectively. It could be a number of reasons. It could be the staff hasn't been trained properly in order to use it. There's been multiple systems in place where they're not communicating effectively amongst each other. And I think in terms of the data, if you don't have a system that talks to each other, you're not going to be able to have the data. And data is crucial. So data will point out issues, further improvements, and it tracks the progress of the service. So ultimately, when I read the report, it kept me really busy. You're reporting consecutively. So we need to iron out those issues as soon as possible. Once you have a system in place, some of those questions could have been answered in a more effective way, and then you can provide the graphics, which will make more sense of in terms of the data, risks, and what needs to be done. Monitoring is absolutely, and tracking and monitoring is absolutely essential for this service.
So it's been acknowledged in other audits about the implementation of Northgate not being as thorough as it could have been. It happened at a time when we were still remote, so staff training was remote, which is quite difficult when training on IT, when you've got different levels of confidence. So I think some of this was about staff confidence around the system. Since this audit happened with each team, we've done a review of their use of the system with Northgate and our own IT people to look at whether we're making full use of the system, retraining people, addressing their concerns, what's the system like for them to use. So that's happened subsequently. There is a plan linked to that, some of which has happened already, some hasn't. But we absolutely need Northgate, as you said, to be the one version that everything's in. So you can just run reports rather than, people refer to spreadsheets and things which they do when they're not confident in the systems. So totally acknowledge that.
It's going to be really quick.
Very, very.
You have to move on.
Yeah.
It has to be really quick. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll be very brief. Just going on to page 35, there's a management response right at the bottom. It says policies and procedures will be amended accordingly. Just tying in with what Councillor Mason said about complex cases, and then tying in with what Councillor Rossetti said about the Housing Improvement Board, how there's no transparency. Will there be more transparency and kind of engagement with members in terms of the amendment to the policies and procedures to ensure it's kind of, more relevant to what we are experiencing as councillors with the legacy issues, to ensure policies do kind of engage with complex cases that, that we'll deal with. So I just wanted to get that feedback.
So we wouldn't ordinarily do that around procedures, so the amendments and the changes to the KPI. On a bigger scale, we're doing quite a big piece of work currently around the allocations policy, which will be about, how do you prioritise people for housing, and could build in an approach to appeals. So at the minute we have a decisions panel, but it is an officer panel. So within that, we can explore what's possible in terms of bringing in more transparency given the importance of this sort of area. So that policy piece definitely, probably less on the procedures, that's more about guidance to staff.
Thanks so much. So can we just note the progress reports for this? Yeah. Thank you. I'll move on to the next item, which is the treasury management update. Can I now invite officer to introduce the report? The officer is to correcting your name correctly.
Hello, good evening. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. So good evening, members. The report I am introducing this evening is the Treasury Management Update Report for the media. And this report provides an update on the Audit Committee's, to the Audit Committee on the Council's Treasury Management activities for the first half of the financial year, so covering the period from the beginning of April up until September. As usual, we've attached an appendix to this report, which goes into a bit more detail around the actual activities, but I will highlight a few of the key activities or the main highlights from the report in my opening remarks. So the first thing to bring attention to members is the economic background. Again, just to highlight that inflation remained persistently high for quite a long period. I think at the beginning of the year, inflation was around 10%. It's now currently around 4.6%. So during the period, so specifically talking about September or April to September, inflation was high. But since then, we've seen that inflation has started to ease. And as such, the expectations of what the Bank of England would do next have also changed. So in section 6.7 of this report, you see the trend of the Bank of England's decision on bank rate. This is the primary rate that drives changes in interest rates, and it's something we've been referring to throughout the course of the year. At the beginning of the financial year, the bank rate was around 4.25%. It increased to 5.25%, but since September, the Bank of England has not increased that rate. And today they had another opportunity for a decision to change it, and they decided to, as a majority, to keep it at 5.25%. So the main implications of this is it does appear that the Bank of England is at least has maybe peaked in terms of the rate. I think they were cautioning sort of the markets to be more to think that inflation is over. I think they're going to keep the rates longer, but there is now an understanding that those rates might not go any further. So that's got implications on the current council's borrowing decisions going forward, and also in the current financial year. In terms of the borrowing activity for the year, again, just to remind members, the main objective for the council is to try and strike a balance between low interest costs and also achieving cost certainty. That means that we have to try and borrow frequently as often. And during the course of this year, we have tried to delay our borrowing decisions until later on in the year. Our feeling at the time was that the rates were higher than they should have been, and that towards the back end of the year and going into 2024, those rates will start to come down. And indeed, that's something that we're starting to observe in the markets. In section 6.1, you see the PWB maturities, which is the rate that we borrow from the government to fund our capital programs. In March, that was around 4.41% for 50 years. It increased to 4.95%. And even in September, when we ended this period, it was around 5.43%. As of today, that rate has come down quite substantially. It's now around 4.8%. So again, it just shows that it seems as if the rates are coming down. And as such, the council has been undertaking some more long-term borrowing during the later part of the year. The key update really to bring to your attention in terms of the borrowing activity is regarding LOBOs. So we had a LOBO lender, and these are the loans, for some of you may be familiar with them, where the lender has an option at set dates to basically increase the rate of interest paid on the loan. The council then has the option to either accept the higher rate or to repay the fee in full or the loan in full without having to pay any additional costs. So this happened towards the end of September, towards the end of this period. The loan in question was around 4.7%. The lender was proposing to increase it to 6.1%, and the council was able to refinance at around 4.6%. Again, details of that are in the appendix in section 4.12. Just moving on to the investment strategy. So the key thing to highlight here again is the table in section 6.19. Basically, it just shows a comparison of the council's treasury investments compared to other local authorities. Again, the council is performing favorably well, mainly due to our strategy of investing in shorter dated funds with the UK government. So anytime those interest rate changes are made, we're able to feel the full impact of those immediately. Again, that's a key area for us to look out for now as we reach the peak of the hiking cycle. If the rates were to start coming down, then you'd expect a reverse in terms of how that table looks. But it's something that we are monitoring quite closely and we'll be looking to develop strategies against. And then just the final point for members to bring aware is just in section 6.22 is that that all the activities that were carried out during this period were compliant with the CIPFA code and the approved treasury strategy. So with those remarks, I'm happy to defer back to you, Chair, and open up for some questions.
Thank you, Tim. Questions? So, Ben?
Why is our rating, as I've misunderstood, AA minus where comparable local authorities are AA plus, I think?
Yes, so in that ratings, so the ratings in terms of how they are compared, so AAA is actually the best rating the rating agencies can give to you. And the only counterparty that used to have that rating was the US government that got then downgraded earlier this year to AA+. Our strategy is mainly to invest with the UK government, which has an average rating of AA-, but also other money market funds also have a similar rating, so it averages out to around AA2. Again, anything in the A category is what they consider as investment grade, which is the highest quality of counterparties you can have. When you start going to the B is when it becomes a bit more challenging in terms of the recovery rate you can get if one of those counterparties went out of business and they owed you money or you'd given them some deposits. So this just highlights that the council's strategy is lower risk compared to other strategies, and it's mainly because we've not deposited with other financial institutions who tend to have lower ratings compared to sovereign and governments.
Councillor Mason.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about the report on page 8 of the appendix. So it's under Treasury Management Indicators. And I'm particularly interested in looking at the maturity structure of borrowing. The reason for that is where we are as a council in terms of our forward budgets and the difficulty we're having with our capital spend, some of which would be reliant on borrowing, and some of the decisions that have been looked at in terms of freezing that at the moment because of the problem of borrowing. And I understand there's a balance, but one of the problems then is that we are not using our financial resources for infrastructure costs in the way that maybe we need to. So I just wanted to be clear, when you say that a balance is being struck, what are the different aspects of that balance? Are they all financial, or are they also taking into account the needs of residents and how we meet those at the same time as dealing with financial issues?
Yes, so the balance refers to, I think, all the things you've mentioned, Councillor Mason. So the primary thing from a council perspective you're trying to balance is the cost certainty. Once we've taken out these loans, then we know exactly how much they're going to cost us and for what period of time. So you want to be sure for that because it just makes your budget setting process a lot more clearer. And knowing how much the council is looking to borrow to finance its capital schemes going forward, that is something we monitor quite closely, looking at how often they're delivering on those projects and also being able to borrow to bring some certainty into those costs. The problem with borrowing, especially now given where the rates are, is you could borrow and have the money sitting in the bank but it's not being deployed. At the same time, you're paying interest on that money. And for rates that are maybe around the 50-year mark, you're probably paying that interest for 50 years. And if the schemes are not getting delivered in the first 5 years or so, then they have the term what they call cost of carry, which basically means that you're paying, but you're not spending the money. So one of the other key things we look for is the cash flows and how they are progressing over the course of the year. So members will recall earlier in the year, I was sort of referring to how much cash we had in the bank. which meant that there was no urgent need for us to borrow. At that point, we're looking at having, I think, about 70 million in the bank, which is more than enough for the council's needs, and taking a loan for a longer time period for around 6%. So we opted against that just because we had that buffer and that liquidity to do so. But as we got towards the end of the year, we've seen that the rates have come down. I think the rates where they are now is way below the 3 to 6 month average of where they've been. So we have been taking that need, the borrowing at lower rates, sometimes even 1% lower than what they would have been at some points in the year. So all the time, that is really the two main things you're trying to do. There is that short-term need you want to be able to fill, but there's also long-term implications to this decision. So we're just trying to match as possible the delivery to those borrowing decisions.
Any more questions? Thank you. So can I just got a couple of observations to make? So on page 51, so there is a acronym PWLB maturities. What that PWLB stands for?
PWLB.
PWLB.
Oh yeah, so PWLB.
Page 51, 6.10.
Yeah, it's the Public Work Loans Board. It's basically a government agency that's been set up to lend to public sector bodies in the country. So that includes local authorities, but also other institutions like the police. I'm not sure if the NHS borrows from them. So what it does is it looks at the gilts, which is the government issued debt, the UK government issued debt. It's got a formula as to how much its averages that. And then local authorities are able to borrow at a discount of 20 basis points, so 0.2% lower than what the gilts are. So it's our primary source of borrowing. Most of our borrowing now, in fact, all the borrowing we've undertaken over the last 3 years or so has been purely PWLB or from other local authorities, which we use more temporarily.
Thank you, Tim. So I just got another question. So how confident you are in relation to the cash flow within the council? How confident you are? How confident you are in terms of the cash flow within the council? So in terms of, do we have enough cash to pay for the services? And if there is a period of shortness, what are the plans in place?
Yeah, so I'm fairly confident with the cash we have at the moment. I think in terms of cash balances, we have something around 70 million at the moment. From month to month, the council probably requires, if we check on a net basis, maybe around 20 million. So that more than covers us for a few time periods. We do have a number of options if there was to be a liquidity constraint on the council. We could borrow from other local authorities. We haven't done as much this year because they've been comparatively more expensive than the PWLB, or we could borrow from the PWLB as well. When we look at I think it's on section 3, there's a CFR, which is the capital financing requirement, which is essentially how much of the borrowing we need to externalize. A lot of the borrowing is currently internally borrowed. There's quite a big balance, which is based on the resources within the council. So all of that could get externalized at some point and would provide a nice cash buffer for the council. So yeah, it is something we try and monitor quite closely. At the moment, because the rates have been higher, it's been lucrative for us to hold higher cash balances. But if the rates are lower, then the opposite strategy tends to be much more better because you're not paying higher levels of interest. So it's one of those two things we're trying to balance, but the cash balances are certainly a lot higher than they've been in the previous 2 years.
Thank you, Tim. Is there any further questions, Tim? Thank you so much, Tim. Can we just note the report? Thank you. So I'll move into the external audit progress. And I now invite Officer to introduce the report. Minesh.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Minesh Jani. I'm the Head of Audit and Risk Management, and I have 2 or 3 reports that I'm presenting today. The first of which is the update that you usually see from me every quarter. The purpose of this document is to set out the work that the internal audit team has done since the last meeting of the committee. So in that regard, this report captures the work of audit for the period 15th of August to the 6th of October. I'm pleased to note that the internal audit has completed 16% of the audit plan. The audit plan is about 840 days. So we completed 6% and then 16% of the audit plan in that period. And that brings the total to the 6th of October to 45%. And they also did some follow-up work of priority one recommendations, and I'm pleased to report that all those recommendations were found to have been implemented. You'll see that there is an appendix attached to this paper that starts at page 71, following the results. We provide the internal audit service, and that details a bit more before the audit plan in terms of the progress they've made in the various audits. It's customary for me to report to you anything significant that the auditors have found in this period. And I have an audit area where the auditors assigned limited assurance, and that related to the work around the delivery of the 7 improvement plan. This was a plan that was put together following an external assessment of our service. So I should say Sense Council Special Education Needs. Following that visit, there were some deficiencies in how we were operating our functions, and our work plan, an improvement plan, was developed. The purpose of this audit was to assess how well we managed in the delivery of that plan. The auditors identified 5 areas where they felt there were gaps in how the improvements had been progressed, and those are set out at the bottom of page 68 and top of page 69. The service has given assurances that they will take on board these audit recommendations and progress them as quickly as they're able. But nevertheless, at the time of the audit, there were deficiencies, and therefore the auditors have assigned their recommendations. But was there, Chair, and take any questions?
Thank you, Nish. Any questions from committee members? Councillor Mason?
Thank you. Thanks a lot for the report. I think that this does reflect the concerns that members have, particularly around autism and particularly around the waiting list times and the quality and timeliness of the assessments that are taking place. I think we've raised it many times. What I need to know is that the service has accepted all recommendations and they're due for implementation to April. So they will put back to you that they're now complete and in place. Will that come? How will we judge whether they're satisfactorily being dealt with?
Thank you, Councillor Mason. So it's customary for the auditors to go back 6 months after the work is finished. So now we issue this report, we will revisit the recommendations and assess as to whether the recommendations have been implemented. And report that back to the committee. And as we've had this evening, there's always the opportunity to invite the relevant officers if recommendations are felt not to have progressed as far as they should be, and to ask further questions as to what the underlying cause of that could be. So this is 2 avenues at least.
Thanks, sir.
Is there any questions? So, Minesh, in relation to the Senate autism, so you said that there's a plan in place to make further improvements. Do you have a timeline for that? Secondly, on page 68, in relation to the waiting time for the autistic spectrum disorders, has been such a long time, and hence the reason it's been provided limited assurance. That's really important, so that's the SAN and that provision itself. So it will be really good to know the timeline when those improvements will be made to ensure that it's no longer limited but adequate. So it's really important. And for that service itself, because I was chair for scrutiny for children's, and I think it's quite surprising to see that there hasn't been much improvement in relation to waiting time and other processes in place.
Thank you, Chair. With your permission, can I take that question back to the service and get the service to respond specifically to the two issues in the timescales? Thank you.
Yeah, just on the point that you said that these reports will be revisited in 6 months' time, I assume that's also for all the other limited assurance levels, so with the community alarms and Clayton School, they'll be revisited as well, just to get that reassurance.
Yes, of an exception. There is a slightly different regime for schools. So for all the work that we do in the council in terms of assistance, yes, that's exactly correct. For schools, there is a slightly different process. Where the schools have been assigned the lowest level of assurance, yearly, we carry out a full audit. Where they've been assigned limited assurance, we carry out a follow-up. But that follow-up isn't in 6 months. It's usually an annual process. So we capture all of the work that's been done during the year and then do one follow-up for our. So that timescale can be anything from 3 months to 11 months potentially.
Any further questions in relation to this report? So just note the report and the updates. So I'll move on to the next item, which is the item 11, I think. Sorry. Item 10. So item 10, so it's illumination. Okay. Yeah. So item 11. Item 11. Yes, it's Vanessa. So it's County Fraud and Corruption Progress Report. So I'd like to invite Vanessa to introduce her report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Vanessa Bateman, I'm Deputy Head of Audit and Risk Management. Page 77 in your agenda is our quarterly update on the work of the anti-fraud team in the council. 13.1 in the report. Page 80 just highlights to members that our risk rating relating to job roles of employment has increased due to a couple of incidents being reported in the quarter. 15.3, the table there has our 2 KPIs. 22 properties were recovered by the council following the work of the team, which is positive change. This is because over the last 12 to 18 months, we've worked really hard on the processes between housing colleagues, fraud and then legal, just to try to get some of those cases that had slowed and been delayed since COVID, sort of through our processes. We've still got 141 live investigations with the team relating to housing fraud. And right to buy, again, this figure's returning to its the sort of levels we were seeing before COVID. We've got 84 live applications that we're looking at, but the work that the team does really focuses on making sure that every application that goes fully through the process is 100% compliant and that the money laundering regulations are also met. In 15.1, sorry. That's all right. And the Blue Badge project, so I was going to talk about as gained momentum, and we can already see our efforts deterring repeat misuse of Blue Badge within the borough, which is central to the objective of this work. Over time, we will shift some of this activity into business as usual within parking enforcement, which will enable the fraud resources to focus in on the much more complex fraud cases and the complex investigations that need to occur And by doing that, we'll be able to work with parking colleagues and the police to really tackle the fraud in the borough. As a page 83, some updates here around our National Fraud Initiative work. 15.4 and 15.5 talk about work around sort of deceased lists and the outcomes that we've achieved in those areas. And under 15.16, there's a void project which we've worked on, and 4 properties have been recovered and at the end of Q2 as a result of that sort of proactive property work around voids. So 15.19 on page 84, just updates on the levels of employee investigation. The referrals have been quite high in this space this year. 7 new referrals in Q2, in addition to the 2 cases that were ongoing. We did close 3 by the end of Q2 and had 6 remaining open. In terms of whistleblowers, we had 1 at the start of Q2. That related to an external organisation, so we were very much having to work on that with external agencies, and that one was still open at the end of Q2. 3 new whistleblowers came in, 2 being dealt with by management. 1 was closed in the quarter, 1 remained open at the end, and we've got 1 of those whistleblowers that we're working on as a live investigation at the end of this Q2 period. Thank you, Chair.
Vanessa, questions? Councillor Brennan, and welcome to Councillor Mason.
I was just wondering, do we have any estimation of how much financial gain we've got from the blue badge investigations?
Yes, I've asked this question of my colleague just today. We've got about, in terms of the sanctions that have been issued and accepted by the people misusing the blue badge, I think we've got about £3,000 income coming to the budget. But there's a lot of sort of letters out there at the moment.
Yeah, of course, coming.
I was just trying to remember what the gain we get from one house that we get back. Was it £22,000 we get from one house?
Yeah,
That's always been my point.
Yeah, but then 22 properties were covered in the period as well.
Is you want to comment?
Sorry.
Councillor Brennan makes a good point, and this is always a challenge that my team always have in terms of the use of limited resources to try to clean all the huge variety of different frauds that we come across. What I'd like to do is try to maintain a certain level of anti-fraud awareness and anti-fraud processes across most of our operations. And it does feel like Blue Badge hasn't really been looked at for the last 2 or 3 years. So there's a little bit more emphasis going in there for the time being. But I'm hopeful that in the next 2 or 3 months, we will move to a place where actually most of that work will be taken up by the service as well. But I hear your point.
Thank you. I just wanted to raise the issue of whistleblowing, because obviously that's about employees and how tenants or other people in the community are able to, you might call whistleblow, i.e. they know that there's a flat in their property, in the block, that somebody's come in and is letting out, and it's clearly, how do people report that, and secondly, how do we encourage people to have an avenue to report that? I've got a third question about whistleblowing, sorry, which is about, that seems quite low given the number of staff that are in Harringay. So I just was interested whether you had a comparator and what your expectations of the numbers of whistleblowing were, and whether we're below or above that or about even, and also that a culture of support for whistleblowers is in place. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. So we get a lot of, we've got a fraud call email address and a phone number. And I think earlier in the year there was a sort of a national fraud campaign, and Manesh did some work with the team to sort of promote that a bit. So there were some posters and things that went up. We don't have a shortage of people coming to us to tell us about things that they don't think are right, which in itself creates a slight burden on the team, because we obviously have to look at everything, gather intelligence and form a view of the sort of the fact in it. So yeah, in terms of encouragement, we do sort of routinely try to publicise that. I think we put something in the members' newsletter as well, again, to try to say, maybe get people to use that route rather than maybe to come to you to use members' inquiries, because it's sort of, if it comes through the right channel, we're much more efficient at dealing with it sometimes. In terms of levels, it peaks and troughs really. I mean, when I first came here, I felt that the whistleblowing in Haringey was really, really high compared to what's in elsewhere. It has settled. We do have whistleblowing going into HR as well. We sort of try to keep an overarching view of it all. A lot of what goes into HR, I would say, could be as much grievance sometimes as whistleblowing. So the policy is quite clear. It's attached to the back of the fraud strategy. We're really good at keeping and reassuring people about being anonymous. You know, a lot of people will come to us. We're really good at keeping names out of it and sort of fulfilling an investigation without any indication of where that's come from, because obviously from an audit perspective, we've got eyes on lots of different things, so we can say that. I would say in Haringey there's a slightly higher percentage of what turns into sort of malicious whistleblows than maybe I've experienced elsewhere. I don't know whether Manesh will concur with that. It's we have quite a few where we do the work on it, and it sort of does not turn into be quite what's being told. So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I've covered everything there, but yeah, it's been a bit lower, but at the moment, but then it does tend to peak and drop, I'll be honest.
That's helpful, thank you. Can I just assume that where you have got malicious whistleblowers and where there's difficulties around that is something that the corporate team look at, so that they're able to promote a culture which is positive around those issues?
That's something we talk to sort of our HR colleagues about, and yeah, employee relations and things like that. So yeah, it's sort of part of the course we've been. There's often a lot of other things gone on behind before a whistleblower comes forward. But yeah, on the whole, we get some really good intelligence actually through our fraud call email account and through what genuine officers bring to us about concerns about what they're seeing. The biggest challenge, I suppose, I mean, we have had a whistleblower in about a third-party organisation where the council commissions resources, and that's always positive for us to see. Sometimes those establishments are harder to reach. We do also do some work around, obviously, having lots of contractors out and about, so it's about having everybody's eyes really on what's going on. And then, like I said, everything that comes to us, we'll look at it in the same way. And just gather the sort of intelligence and the evidence and the facts, and then take it from there.
Councillor.
And also there's some really good work. I mean, I know you have such a small team, so I'm very, very impressed that you managed to do so much work. On the budget, when we had a look about it, we had to do the matches, the cards from other areas. And I think the staff weren't informally checking. They particularly vouch, so I think they were accepting the vouch, but they weren't checking on the number plate or whatever to identify whether this match real actually belongs to the person. So I just wanted to feedback to public services, but I'm sure that we scrutinise it because actually when we go we do all that. They're everywhere, and I think on the whole, every blue badge is actually got a action. It's a matter of worrying about it all. So it'd be great if you were able to get them to understand how important this area is.
Yes, that's the reason this project's really come into being, because the deterrent factor around blue badges was really just a PCN ticket and has been for quite a while. There are challenges. The technology in this area is massively improved in the last couple of years, which really helps us to do our work. It is much more information to the operatives on the ground about the badges that are cancelled and stolen and all those things. There are challenges around a blue badge doesn't always link to a specific vehicle, it links to the person, and that does bring a challenge into it. But the technology now around whether it's a valid badge or not being used, which is the sort of the first part of the check, is really strong. So yeah, but we are seeing quite a lot of I suppose organised and a lot of theft around blue badges, and we have quite a lot of contacts from the police often where they've come across where people have got quite a few badges, so they're obviously faking them and selling them on. So that's where the team really want to focus their efforts on, that sort of disruption to that activity in the borough. But yeah, we've worked really hard with the parking team to get this up and running, and obviously through the deterrent factor being actually some financial sanctions now over and above a PCN, we can already see that's deterring people. Match days might be a bit more of a challenge, but they are out in force on those days.
Thank you, Chair. We heard earlier about improvements plans to improve the IT systems with repairs, and with this in mind, do you think this will help the efficiencies of your investigations, particularly around web properties, and potentially see higher numbers in the future?
Yeah, systems and data and accurate audit trails massively will help us in what we're trying to do. One of the challenges we have, and I think Denise referred to it, teams using 3 different teams and using them inconsistently. So my officers will spend a lot of time going through various systems and trying to find what's going on. And in some of the housing areas, we cannot do that without actually going and finding someone to help us to do that. So yeah, the improvements that they're making and that sort of single focus in Northgate and people making sure that records and audit trails are maintained consistently will massively help us. We always get to the end result, but it's the time it takes us that will change. We'll get there a lot quicker.
So I'm just going to go back to the blue badge for. I think this is. I think it is a really quite hard area in order to track all the use of blue badges, whether it's legitimately or whether it's progress. I think there needs to be like a central system. I agree that in terms of having our system, which is quite robust. I think that there's like a joint system. But for example, in London boroughs, where systems can talk to each other. Look, just going back to Councillor Municipal, Spurs, during the match day, you often see loads of blue badge holders. It's, you can't believe it, and they park because they have the privilege to park, by the line and so forth. It can be quite dangerous if they're not genuine users, because they literally just leave their car in roads where even ambulance, if something happens, ambulance can't even drive it that way. I think they said that question needs to be tightened up a bit more. I think on the way to overcome that issue, it needs to be even much more thought about how a central system where you can actually gather the data that's genuinely used or not. Without having that, I'm afraid not going to resolve some of the issues. But it will continue. That's observation.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Great. So can we just note the recommendations and we'll move on to the next item. So then item 12, appointment of non-voting independent advisors to the audit committee. Can I now invite Officer to introduce the report, Dinesh Young?
Chair, so this report is to make sure that we constitutionally apply our processes. Under our constitution, the council can choose to appoint independent advisors to any of its committees. And the full council in March received a paper to appoint 2 independent members to the newly constituted audit committee. You can find a copy of that paper at page 91. Please report that the process for the appointment of the advisors is now complete. And we have been successfully appointing 2 independent members to the audit committee. They've been appointed for a 4-year term, beginning of October to the end of September 2027. There is a small remuneration attached to that. And in line with our constitution, I asked the audit committee to recommend to the full council that the advisors be appointed formally.
Is there any questions?
We welcome the advisors to the team.
Okay, so the recommendation for the full council is to appoint 2 independent members, non-voting members, as paragraph 6.2 for the period of 4 years, commencing the 1st of October 2003 and on 1st of September 2027. And Minesh has mentioned about the remuneration, and we are very pleased to have you back. So thanks so much for coming in today. Okay, so we'll move on to the item 13, the annual governance statement. So it's Vanessa. Was it, or is it Vanessa?
So just for confusion there, it's me again.
Okay.
So the background to this paper is that each year, about July time, I bring a paper to you which sets out a review of our governance and what that review is about. It's quite an important process. For the work that we do as a public sector organisation, there's a lot of trust that's built into the system. And trust is the key driver for how we engage with our citizens in the public. So that document that I bring to you is a self-assessment of how we consider our governance to be operating in line with best practice. And the best practice is defined by CIPA and SOLIS. So they essentially set out what they think is how we should operate. The purpose of this document is to give you an update of those areas where we found that our processes are not as good as they should be. So those areas where there are deficiencies in how we carry out our operations. And there were 6 areas that were identified. You'll see that there's an action plan attached to this paper. And you've got management comments from the directors of those services to give you an update on where we are with those significant governance issues that were originally identified. Just for clarity, there were 6, as I say, and they were: 1, the need to deliver savings to meet our medium-term financial strategy. 2, there have been concerns raised about how robust we were in decisions being made in relation to our property, particularly around the acquisitions and disposal of property. The 3rd area was, we heard from Jahid earlier, the health and safety risks attached to how we managed our residential property and the subsequent need for us to refer ourselves to the regulator for social housing. The 4th area was around the management of our commercial property. The corporate committee, as was, and received a paper which set out the findings, and this was the insurance report. 5th area was around the need to strengthen our information governance framework. And the final area was how we need to improve our leisure services. As I say, the table then sets out against each of those 6 governance issues, the current position. But if I pause there, just to any questions.
Any questions? So, Nish, so if you compare the governance from previous years and plans in place for the upcoming years, are you confident that we'll be able to meet those requirements and those improvements on time, given the fact that all the challenges that was experienced?
Thank you, Chair. That question has a myriad of matters to consider. I'm confident that from a governance point of view, as an authority, we will do everything we can to improve and to make sure that we set the right framework with the right behaviours and the right culture. A good example of this would be something that is recommended, but it's not a requirement that local authorities have, and that's something called a local code of corporate governance. We have one, but it's quite old, and we recognise that it needs to be updated. So a lot of work is being done as we speak to make sure that that document is put in place and it's refreshed. And that gives me confidence that actually we do take our governance arrangements seriously, and we wish to make sure that we set out our standards in a very clear way. Instead of all that, we are still going to be challenged, and there are so many challenges upon us as a local authority, as a public sector entity, and those challenges are going to test our governance framework. I'd like to think that we will have a robust relationship to be able to respond to them, so we are going to be challenged, that is for sure.
Thank you, Nish. Mason?
Yeah, thank you. I think that the two areas that make me really squirm are to do with, because some of them have been dealt with, but the two areas are savings identified in the MTFS, and the other one is the management of commercial property. Both of them, because it feels like there's a bit of a wish and a prayer behind them, rather than anything which is really strongly defined. I was at the adult services meeting last night, or Tuesday, and there were £1 million of savings on the paper we've been told about, all of which were to do with improved independence of adults in our community and ways in which they could be supported, which is laudable and a really positive aim. But it's also like, excuse me, can I see which way the wind is floating? And we've already got an overspend of 20.9 million. So that's why I'm very concerned that we could be putting ourselves into a very difficult position. The only reassurance we've got is what Tim says about the amount of money that's sitting there in our reserves, and we can borrow more. So I suppose my question about that is, how do we make sure that we are keeping track of that? And how do we be confident as a committee that we are identifying realistic savings where they're needed, and that the spend is also realistic? So that's that one. And the second question I had was to do with the commercial property, just because I'm not reassured at all that anybody's doing anything about it. It just feels like it's floating around, and there are 944 commercial properties, many of which I know about, and many of which are completely wildly used. They're not necessarily being used for anything to do with council business. I'm not sure if rent's being paid and goodness knows what. So it's all chaotic, and I can see that there's going to be a report back to Cabinet on February 24, but it does feel like an area that we could be expediting a little bit quicker, not by February 24, but more doing something about more quickly, particularly given the difficulties we have in the budget.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Right, so savings. Technically, local authorities have been on this journey of savings for a long, long time. And each year, savings get harder and harder and harder. So officers are grappling with a difficult situation. And that's not going to get any easier for next year, clearly it won't. In the process, though, the point you make is absolutely valid. That there must be a mechanism by which we are assuring ourselves that savings proposals that we put forward have a realistic chance of delivery, and they can be realised in due course. That is known, that is recognised in the authority. The senior leadership colleagues, they've assessed that, and they are working through a process for a mechanism to be set up such that there is a review of proposals, and then that review identifies genuine, if that's the right phrase, savings. The delivery of savings also becomes important. The savings may be realisable when we start to get there. So that is also part of this equation of trying to make sure that we've got the right infrastructure, the right framework for identifying and delivering savings. The second part of the question was around commercial property. Because that area was assigned nil assurance previously, there will be a fresh audit of commercial property again, because I want to be satisfied that the governance is improved in that area. So there will be a fresh audit, and I will report the findings of that back to this committee.
Can you just tell us when that might be?
The audit is not ongoing. Optimistically, I'll say to the next committee, because I think the audit actually has completed, but the auditors haven't finished writing the report.
Thank you, Mr. Councillor Brennan.
Going back to savings, I couldn't help noticing, and again, I was also at the Adult Health Committee, what struck me, and has struck me across the board recently, and over last year's savings, is how many of them are dependent on updating our IT. Because I do rather feel that we're putting such a strain on, and also how often when you look at the previous year's savings, how often you see that this is not yet being implemented because we're still waiting for the IT. And then the next year there are more savings that are actually dependent on our working in a more IT proper way. And so that did raise concerns for me, because what I really liked about the adult health and care savings was that none of them would impact on our resident care. It was remarkable, and really, I really liked it, because we weren't going to cut back on resident care. We were going to do savings by doing things more efficiently, which depend on us, on our IT capability. I am worried about that, because I feel like it could all, that for me is a risk.
Thank you, Councillor Brennan. So this committee will know that I've brought papers before where we've tried to implement new solutions. And sometimes they've gone well, and sometimes they haven't. And that goes to your point that actually with digital transformations, they're never necessarily straightforward or easy. What I've tried to do so far is every year identify those areas where the level of risk is high and where we need assurances, to try to program in some level of audit coverage to give us some assurances as early as possible that if there are things that are not quite going to plan, we can pick them up. The latest one that he looked at was the project pre-implementation. So in the plan for last year, we had a review programmed in, which is completed this year for both children and adults. And actually that's relatively speaking, that's gone relatively well. And that is going to be very, very helpful for the service, because actually the solutions they've sought are going to be more efficient and should give more information. So there are opportunities that are presented from these transformations that we would like to highlight the rest as well. And that is going to be a challenge for not just us, but everyone.
Any further questions? Thanks. You just note the progress report for the site. So, item 14, which is the new item for the urgent business.
We will still go to page 11 for the action.
Okay. Do you want to just provide an update on the vision?
So members, this on page 11, there's quite an important table that sets out actions arising from previous committees. Where committees asked for various information. I've also gone through the tracker in detail, but I just want to point you to that tracker. And if there's anything that you think is missing or needs addressing, please email me and it's something that I just want to highlight.
Thank you. Yes, no, page 11. Councillor Brown.
I'm just going to say I was really pleased with that story. That's all I was going to say. I thought it was spot on.
These are the reports of appraisals. Okay, should we just move on then to item 14?
Yeah, no, new items reports and check.
Thank you. So the dates for the future meeting, the original date for the meeting on the 1st of February 2003. But we are proposing that the meeting will take place on the 22nd of January to meet the deadlines of the Treasury Management. I'm just asking the committee to agree for the 22nd of January. Is that agreed? Monday.
22nd.
Monday. Well, we checked the diaries, be sure that it's not clashing with any other meetings that members might have. Councillor?
I'm very sorry.
And then I have to apologise because I've got a ward panel meeting that night, which I need to go to.
Will you look at any other deputies?
I think it's the councils, yeah, it's quite we've otherwise, so it clashes with the other committee meetings that members might have on Thursday, hence the reason we are proposed for the 22nd. So I'm just going to ask Nash to have a look at what's the possible alternatives.
Looking at thinking it might Thursday 25th might be possible.
It's councillor Washington might have that.
I've got my mobile, so.
Yeah, it's fine. I think you have a meeting with Alexandra Palace on that day.
I will then, I will say.
Say that's the reason.
Okay, so obviously Thursday is very, very clean good. There is 23rd, looks clear. Yeah, 23rd Tuesday.
Just
Is there a way of doing it in February? Do we have to?
before the treasury.
Thursday, 18th.
It involves January. For the treasury management reports to be published.
Members want to agree. It is, the date is, there's a screening meeting on that date. If nobody's on the OVU screening meeting.
On the 18th.
On the 18th.
Or is scrutiny.
Is it not special funds that's been held over?
No, it's a general meeting.
To the 18th. What day was it?
That is a Thursday.
Thursday the 18th. Is that agreed?
Yeah.
Thursday the 18th?
Just a really quick ask, I have surgeries on every other Thursday. could we start at 7:30?
Yes, that is, we can be
Sorry,
available.
then it means,
Councillor Mason will accommodate that, that's not an issue.
thank you very much.
7:30 start for the 18th. Do you agree for that date? Yeah, thank you so much. So that date has been agreed, which is on the 18th of January at 7:30. Okay, so I think there isn't any further items, so I will close the meeting. Thanks so much for your contribution, and thank you so much for the members who have joined us today this evening. Thank you.
First.
Yes. Thanks so much.
Thank you.